By now, China is one of the most important providers of international development finance in the world. So it's crucial to understand what is going on. How does China allocate its aid? Where does it go? What are its effects? But that's not as easy. So China does not provide official aid statistics. If you're interested in German aid or aid by the United States, you can just go online and download this information. So this is not feasible for China, which is why we collected a database together with colleagues in the United States and at Heidelberg University. So we collected information from government reports, from NGO documents, media reports, and built a database to be able to follow the Chinese activities in developing countries. Yeah, that's a very good question, but probably the better question would be, where is China not active? So by now, China's development projects are in essentially all countries in the world, with the exception of the few countries that recognize the government in Taipei and not the government in Beijing. But even there are sometimes exceptions, as these countries also obtain Chinese aid after natural disasters like major earthquakes. So China is not only active in all countries, it's also providing aid activities in almost all sectors. Not just the infrastructure projects we hear about in the media, also much less known activities in health, education, and the environmental sector. Right, so we do not only analyze where Chinese aid goes at the country level, but also at the subnational level. So the question is, which provinces within countries receive more Chinese aid than others? And one of our most interesting findings is that there is significantly more Chinese aid flowing to the birth regions of political leaders. This is not necessarily the case that the Chinese government wants that these regions receive more Chinese aid. It's just that China follows an aid-on-demand approach. So the locations of its aid activities follow the requests of recipient governments, and the outcome is that there is significantly more going on in the birthplaces of political leaders, which seems to be problematic from a development perspective, as these areas tend to be among the richest parts of African countries. Sure. So there is a famous example of a school in Sierra Leone. Yeah, in an unimportant village, but this village happened to be the birthplace of the Sierra Leonean president. But this is not only happening in Africa, it's also happening in Asia. In Sri Lanka, for example, the birth province of the president obtained a huge airport and many other infrastructure projects. That's a very good question. So, and this is what we all want to know more about. So, what are the actual effects on the ground of China's development activities around the world and in Africa in particular? So, this is not as easy to answer. China is active in the developing world for a long time, for decades, but initially its activities were not as big as they are now. So we only have a few years with significant activities. So we are still at an early stage to understand the effects. But our first results show that Chinese activities, Chinese development projects promote economic development on the ground if you look at the provinces where these projects are implemented. Of course, there are also concerns about side effects, and we need to study much more the unwelcomed effect of China's activities. So there's research on effects on corruption, on political effects as well. So we need to know about its growth effects, we need to know about effects on inequality, on other development outcomes. We need to know also more about the side effects we hear about in the media. So there are claims that China's aid activities affect corruption, affect democracy, affect attitudes of the recipient population. So there's still a lot to do. But with the database that we gathered together with aid data, we are able to start this endeavor to better understand the effects. So we started to look at the growth effects, at the development effects of China's activities. And indeed, we find positive growth effect on GDP, but also on local development. Still, a lot remains to be done. What are the effects on environmental outcomes? What are the effects on labor standards? So we hope to learn more in the years to come. A major challenge is transparency. So as researchers, we need to know what is going on. So we need to collect data to better observe the effects of China's activities. But obviously, this does not only apply to China. There's also an information gap with respect to many other actors in the field. So there's also no official database available on the aid activities of Russia, Iran, and many other players in the field of international development. A major challenge for social science research is data, is information, is transparency. So in order to learn about the effects of China's development activities around the world, we need better data. So we need to continue and further track China's activities around the world. Obviously, an official aid database would be very useful for researchers around the world. But this is nothing that only applies to China. This also applies to other major players in the sphere of international development around the world, to other donors that are not fully transparent about their aid activities. And this is something that is not only needed for social science research, we also need more transparency for policymakers in order to coordinate their aid activities.